Hey everyone, welcome back to the next segment of the First Gen Psychologist. I'm Dr. Lisette. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am the First Gen Psychologist. I am a First Gen Latina. In addition to being a licensed psychologist, I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, and today I am your host. And so let me share a little bit with you more about this series, and then I'm going to tell you more about our guest today. So this series, we will be covering topics that destigmatize mental health, as well as topics for personal development and empowerment centered on the first gen experience. And today's topic, I'm very excited for this. And the title of our talk today is Embracing Non-Traditional Gender Roles in Latinx Relationships. And I will be speaking with Carla Avalos, who's an LCSW and PMHC. I need to learn, what does PMHC stand for actually? Give me 1 second. Let me unmute you because I want to understand that. What is PMHC? Yeah.
So perinatal mental health specialist.
Okay, perinatal mental health specialist. Okay, you might also spoke with someone who's a perinatal mental health,
Yeah.
who's learning more of that from Alvarado Therapy.
Yes, her. Yeah. Patricia.
Patricia. And so, all right, let me go back to your bio, but I just wanted to make sure you understood, y'all. Like, you don't always know everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me share with you more about her. So it's probably I realize now it's in my next sentence. Carla Avalos is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified perinatal mental health professional who was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. She is the daughter of a Salvadorian immigrant mother. Ms. Avalos works full-time as a clinical supervisor for the LA County Department of Mental Health and also has a part-time private practice. Ms. Avalos is passionate about providing education and resources to the BIPOC and Latinx community regarding various mental health topics such as perinatal mental health, awareness, relationships, self-care, communication skills, boundaries, and challenges of being a first gen. So Carla, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Lisa. So nice to see you, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started because I know we don't have a lot of time together. And so let's get into this topic. And I always give this caveat with everyone, and anytime I do any of these talks, we are touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this topic. Going into depth on this is not something we can do in 20 minutes. And so if this is something that resonates for anyone, if you're listening to this, watching this, please reach out to Carla or Ms. Avalos to learn more about it, perhaps work with her. And at the end of this segment, I will share more about how to connect with her. But all right. So, okay, let's go jump right in. What are some non-traditional gender roles in Latinx relationships? And how do they differ from traditional gender roles?
Okay. So I'm very passionate about this topic because I feel like it's definitely been coming up a lot in my couples therapy sessions and also individual sessions. What I mean by that is that, as we know, the pandemic has shifted a lot of things for a lot of us, especially the gender roles, specifically in the Latinx community and relations. So what I mean by that is that we are learning that it can't be just the wife or the mom to be able to do everything for the household. She needs a teammate. And as we know that typically the man or the husband, he's been known as to be like, the breadwinner, right? But during the pandemic, we're learning that the mom just can't handle everything, or the wife. We need to have a little bit of an equal balance. I feel that it's hard to kind of reach 50-50 just because of our genetic makeup, but we're finding that I'm definitely seeing like more Latinx men are embracing, like, taking more roles of parenting the kids, or doing the cooking, or helping out with the laundry. And there's even also some cases where the man is also embracing, I can be the stay-at-home dad while, while the wife goes out and be the primary breadwinner. So, and I know that this is like a huge cultural shift because traditionally, like as I mentioned earlier, it's typically like the mom where her primary roles are, be the wife, be the mom, and do everything around the household while the husband's the one that goes out, and provides the financial, you know, the supplies and, the protector of the family. But now things are changing because we're noticing that, again, we need a little bit more of an even balance in order to reduce the burnout, not just for the mom, but just for reducing the strain of the family dynamics.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what I wanted to just add something, just clarifying, say, well, as you were talking, just generally, right? So at this moment, we're talking about heterosexual relationship,
Yes,
relationship
heterosexual,
between a
yes.
man and what person who identifies as a woman, person who identifies as a man in a relationship. And traditionally in Latinx culture, you think of these values around gendered expectations. And so commonly, I think, so you're describing as being racist, the perception that women are the ones in charge of the household, functioning as a household, right? That's cooking,
Yes.
cleaning, or scheduling, probably organizing, being aware of everyone's needs. And the male role in this example is around someone who is a provider, predominantly a financial provider and protector role.
Yes.
Right? That's exactly, okay, that's what I'm identifying. So in terms of, and now what you're seeing is in terms of what people are doing non-traditional, it's no longer based, the roles in the relationship based on the gender. The roles are now being based more on maybe what makes most sense within the couple, within
exactly.
It's not, oh, you're a female identified, that means that you're automatically the person who cooks and cleans. It's no, we have more maybe a conversation around how to divide the household responsibilities.
Yes.
But I think a little bit of what I spoke on now is some of what you were leading into, which is understanding the role that cultural expectations and norms maybe play in shaping these gender roles, right? So I talked about it as values, right? And so what are some other maybe cultural expectations that can shape these gender role expectations?
Yeah. So, something that's pretty commonly known, or maybe for those of you who don't know, obviously, like if you identify, as a Latinx male, typically you grow up in a household where there's you're taught to be, the machismo like mentality. But what I mean by that is that it's not always unhealthy, because there's some healthy qualities about being, identifying as masculine, meaning that you're strong, you're the protector of the family, like, your family is like your number one. That's definitely something that's really like embraced and valued. However, there's obviously like a lot of like research that has shown that sometimes that pressure or that weight that Latinx males carry, as far as like, I always have to be strong, I always have to be powerful, I can't show a lot of emotions, that can have, sometimes a negative impact on the family like dynamics, especially when there's grief or when there's relationship issues. They don't feel comfortable talking about like what's going on. Like, let's say that there's stress at work, there's something going on with, his own parents or his own siblings. They kind of feel like they have to kind of tough it out, right? And then like for the female, the Latinx female, the wife or the partner, she's the one that, again, like we touched on earlier, they have to take care of everything, like no matter what, like rain or shine, like, whether they're working outside the house or just being a stay-at-home mom, they have to hold everybody together. And again, we're recognizing that that's a lot of weight on just one person. So now with doing the shift of the non-traditional roles, we're recognizing that there has to be definitely more conversation about like what is best like for the family dynamics in order for them to thrive and start to move a little bit away from what the gender roles that you grow up hearing in.
I muted myself and forgot. So yeah, it's I think going in terms of that cultural expectation, it's sort of what you saw growing up, like who
Mhm.
you identified with growing up and what sort of you expected from at that point, right?
Mhm.
And so as we continue to talk about this, right, it's very much something that can be shaped for individuals, right, with
Mhm.
gender roles. And this could be beyond thinking about just within like
Yes.
Latinx relationships and expectations and across all the different social systems that reinforce expectations on gender, right? So
Mhm.
culturally, it's in the home, right? If you identify as female, you're looking at your mom and you're maybe identifying like, oh, this is what's going to be expected of me.
Mhm.
Watching my mom, watching that, how that is. And I remember my mom really wanted to make a shift a little bit in those dynamics because both her and my dad would take turns cooking, right? So I think of like
Love
the
that.
difference that made for me. But even then, I still have moments where I still feel this pull to be very much into caregiver role, right? But so noticing that shift, there's a little bit of a confusion. It's like we're both going to cook, but also eres mujer, deberías de ser más detallista. You're a woman. You
Uh-huh.
should be more detail oriented. You should be more careful with certain things. You should be more mindful. And so I watched her want to make that jump, right? To
Mhm.
shift that mentality, but it was hard.
Mhm.
And so in my awareness, have my own conversations with myself, with my therapist, with whoever it is to navigate that. But so thinking about this is, like in couples, in a couple relationship, what are some ways that you have seen folks maybe navigate having non-traditional gender roles? You gave a few examples earlier, but what are some maybe other like tips or consejos you might have?
Yeah. So I definitely think, again, in doing a lot of things that I'm seeing in the couple sessions that I provide is that when I ask about like, whether they've been married or been together, doesn't matter, like regardless the amount of time, I always bring up in like the initial session, like, what was the conversation like between you two regarding, let's say, household responsibilities, or how are you going to navigate the chores around the house. And I would say, I guess it's just a very small amount, but I would say 80% of them never had that conversation. They just kind of went along with it. Obviously, nothing like, wrong about that, but what I'm finding is that in not having those conversations, it's bringing up a lot of issues that they are now seeking therapy for. So my
Mhm.
suggestion, well, recommendation is, whether like, even if you're not engaged, even if you're in a long-term committed relationship, it's definitely important to have those conversations as far as like, in the event when we eventually move in together, like what are some things that we feel comfortable doing? Like, are we gonna, combine the cooking like together? Like the laundry, like basically assessing what are your strengths. Like for me in my relationship, I'll be honest, I don't like cooking. I do not like
Mhm.
cooking, and I know that's something that my family sometimes makes fun of me about, but that's okay. But I have other strengths. My strengths are doing the laundry, cleaning, organizing, and my partner, he is a wonderful cook, thank goodness. So so that's how we're navigating in our own relationship. But basically just assessing what your strengths are and what works best like for you and your relationship, because at the end of the day it is going to be just you two under the same roof, and you have to figure out what makes you guys like, happy, and also reduces like the tension, because as I mentioned before, a lot of the conflict that can arise later on is the misunderstanding regarding like, oh, I thought you were going to throw out the trash. Like, no, that's your job. So it's kind of like, ah. So just having those
Mhm.
conversations early on, I think, is super important.
Yeah, no, I hear that. It's just clarifying the expectations, right? I
Differences.
think
Mhm.
we're talking so much about how maybe these cultural expectations, societal expectations, they shape a lot of how what we begin to expect, I guess, in relationships, expect and
Mhm.
value. But in that moment, I think it's feeling empowered to have these
Yes.
conversations and
Mhm.
clarify. And you know what? And I say this because sometimes it's not something we think about, right?
Mhm.
You might just assume like this is what you're going to do. This is
Mhm.
your role,
Uh-huh.
and that comes from so many places, right? And so
Mhm.
so I love the tip of just talk about it, just communicate about it, and I
Mhm.
think in that conversation, maybe that'll cause some reflection for you as a partner, or
Definitely.
whatever that is. It's what is the role that I like? What do I want to fulfill in terms of our household responsibilities, or
Mm-hmm.
even just in our current responsibilities as a couple, right? Do I
Mm-hmm.
expect my significant other to always initiate planning our dates, planning our fun time?
Mm-hmm.
Do we
Mm-hmm.
take
That's
turns with that?
correct.
Right? I
Yes.
can
Yeah.
imagine that being really helpful. I'm not someone who specializes in couples, so I'm giving ideas based on dynamics. I work with
Yeah.
individuals on dynamics, but
Uh-huh.
as you know, I've been meeting with a lot of couples therapists lately, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, like that's a that all of these different conversations. It seems so simplified when we talk about it in this space, but
Mm-hmm.
it really can be that simple, right? If you have
Mm-hmm.
two people who are open to hearing one another out,
Mm-hmm.
and like just let each person have that, like express themselves, then you can have a better conversation around those expectations. That's what I like to think in the perfect world.
Yeah, and then it is, and I also recognize that it can be scary because you also be maybe fearful that maybe your partner may have expectations of you that you're not comfortable with. But even if that does happen, that's okay. There could be some compromise, but the important thing is just having those conversations. And like you
Yeah.
said, it definitely brings up like a lot of like reflections. And I was also going to mention that there is this really a great documentary that touches on these household responsibilities subject. It's called Fair Play, and it's on Hulu, and it's based on the book where the author just basically focuses on, she gives tools for couples to how to work out these household responsibilities and chores.
Yeah.
So that's a book that I highly recommend. I'm like halfway reading through it, but the documentary is pretty powerful. It really touches on the dynamics of like there has to be some more of a balance in the household, because again, one person just can't shoulder all the weight anymore. It's too much.
What is it documentary called again?
It's called Fair Play.
Fair Play
Yeah,
on
at
Hulu.
Hulu. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Fair
Yeah.
Play on Hulu. If
Yeah.
those of you listening wanna take and wanna learn a little bit more and go deeper into some of what we're learning about.
Mm-hmm.
And so so I think we've touched on this, like some challenges or obstacles, right? And I think the biggest one is one, right, not having the conversations, just not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would imagine that's the biggest sort of challenge. If you're not talking about it, how can you overcome anything? But
Mm-hmm.
is there any specific thing or two things that you would want to add to this?
Yeah, I will say that let's say if you identify as female and
Mhm.
Latinx, and if you are the one that like, well, I'll just use me like for example.
Okay.
Again, like I mentioned, I'm not a fan of cooking, and
Mhm.
growing up, I would definitely hear from my family that, oh well, you're never gonna find a husband if you don't know how to cook.
Mhm.
But I think we also have to look and recognize that just because you're identify as female and you're Latinx doesn't mean that you're going to be good at the same things that the females in your family are doing or were raised to do. You got to embrace like what works for you and what looks good for you. Like I mentioned earlier, like my strengths are organizing, cleaning, doing laundry, and sometimes you got to tap into what works best like for you, and then for your relationship. I know that also on the reverse side, for my partner's family, like he was actually taught to cook from like an early age, because in his family they it was important for them to learn actually non-traditional gender roles. So I want to do highlight that as far as like you have to, again, at the end of the day, look at what works like best for you. And yes, there may be some pushback like from from family members who kind of are not fully embracing the non-traditional gender roles yet, but at the end of the day, it's important to set your boundaries, and also recognize that this is like your relationship, so you
Yeah.
are welcome to create like your own narrative, your own story as
Mhm.
to whatever you feel is best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love
Mm-hmm.
that. And so beginning to take agency within that,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that, like I think that's the empowerment part, and recognizing that we can have a say. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about beginning to have those conversations, especially, I think for me contextually, I'm thinking about people living in the US, not necessarily having any concerns about needing to like there's a lot that comes up for me here. I'm like realizing like I think the
It's
biggest one
okay.
that comes up for me, it's like, in certain sometimes there could be unhealthy relationship dynamics. And so what I wanted to highlight is right now, as we're talking and as we're giving these examples, I'm speaking from a space where there is that healthy relationship dynamic where there is that capacity to have these conversations, to be open and to
Definitely.
feel safe in those, right?
Mhm.
If you're feeling unsafe, know that what we're talking about applies typically only to relationships because in relationships, it takes everyone in the relationship to
Mhm.
be open to it, right? And so if you're
Yeah.
in an unhealthy relationship where the other person is closed off, it doesn't matter how much you're trying to have these conversations, it's not
Yeah.
going to work. And so and vice versa, right? Like you
Mm.
both need to have that flow. Otherwise you're just butting heads. So
Mhm.
that's what was coming up for me, I think, as I was thinking
Yeah.
about. So really, yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point.
Yeah,
That's why like I mentioned earlier,
yeah,
I mean, ideally, in the dating phase, it's good to kind of, just kind of gauge an idea. I'm not saying to have like a full on, like hour-long conversation, but just gauge an idea. Like if you're starting off in dating and this is something that's important to you, don't be shy about like kind of just getting an
mhm,
idea about like what's that like for you, so
yeah.
that way it can kind of eliminate like some tension and confusion like later on, once you're like moved in and
Yeah.
or married or what have you. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out because that's actually super super important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's just as we're talking about, like again, we're at the tip of the iceberg. So these are just other
Mm.
considerations that come up for me as we're talking about this. But what I want to make a transition to, because I realized at the time, is just if you have any other consejos for first gen based on what we've discussed so far in terms of embracing non-traditional gender roles in Latinx relationships.
Yes, I mean, just take up space, like, and then that means not just for yourself, but also like in your relationship. Like,
Yeah.
it's important to have these vulnerable and honest conversations, and just finding like what works best, like for you and for your family. And if you need like more resources or assistance, you can follow me on Instagram, and like I mentioned, the Hulu documentary Fair Play is a really good one just to kind of just start the process of brainstorming and opening up that conversation like with your partner. So that's something that I highly recommend.
I love that. I love this consejo. And so
Yeah.
I think the last sort of the biggest and hardest question I have is how can we support you and your work, Carla?
Yeah, so please follow me on Instagram, Nuevos Caminos Therapy. I post a lot of stuff like on stories and also like on reels regarding like how to teach, couples like how to communicate or anything related to first gens. But definitely follow me on there for resources and education.
Yes, awesome. And on there, will you list if you ever have openings for clients? Is that how people
Yes,
can see if they want to work with you? Okay.
yes,
All right.
definitely. Yes,
So Nuevos Caminos Therapy is that where you
yes,
can find
yes.
Carla Mizabalos. And so thank you again so much for being here
Thank
with
you,
us today.
Lisette.
Such an important topic. There's so much more I want to delve into. I'm like, I don't know. We might just make this a multiple part.
Right.
Every few months, I'll just
Yeah.
have Carla come back and give you another
Yeah.
little gem.
Mhm.
So thank you again, Carla. Thank you everyone for
Mhm.
watching. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Every episode will go live at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on
Mhm.
Tuesdays for as long as I can do it. So
Yes.
let's keep doing this together. And thank you again, Carla.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. It was such a pleasure as always.
Bye everyone.